Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for everybody that's come through. We have a wonderful audience here today, and I'm sure we're going to, as we continue, have a few more folks joining us. My name is Louise Martin, and I'm the CEO of a company called Estate Living, for those of you who do not know me. We are still letting people into our audience, still letting people into the room. So for those of you who are already here, thank you.
Yeah.
Maybe we should give them a few more seconds to come in. If it's possible, if you could just mute yourself. We've heard an update on the an update on the war that's happening, and I think that might just take away from some of the excitement that we're going to be sharing with you today. So let's say are we open to giving the ladies another minute? You know, we are ladies. We're allowed to be fashionably late. Last chance to grab a cup of tea or a cup of coffee or something that you might want to have with you as you listen to the next 45 minutes where we talk about this real challenge that women face when it comes to getting development funding, especially in those early days when we are looking for it, whether it's entry-level funding or any type of funding. So I think you're going to all find that this is very interesting, insightful. I see some folks have got AI sort of read the meeting, so to create notes. We will also be recording this meeting, and once we've taken 10 years of my life in post-production, we will put it up onto Estate Living's website. I'm sure business partners will have it up on their site, so you can go back and view it and share it with anyone else that you feel it would be of benefit. I think we can perhaps maybe get going. So Hesley, if you're ready, and then let us start. As if everybody is ready. Thank you, Hesley, for popping in there. So I think the first thing to do before we get going is just quickly cover a little bit of housekeeping. So if you look, I'm not sure what device you're watching this webinar on, but if you look at your screen, you will see that there is a chat box. That chat box is specifically for your questions. We asked you questions when you filled in your sign up and your registration. So we do have those kind of key questions and where you have key areas that we will discuss in this webinar. But if you have anything that comes up whilst we're talking that triggers, pop it in the chat box and we will make sure that we would do our best to cover those questions. And this is a conversation, folks, so please feel free to share. You have got the expert in front of you. This is that chance to ask those burning issues. Before we get going, I'm just going to share my screen. Please bear with me. It's been a bit of a while since I've done a webinar, so hopefully I won't mess it up. So here we go, and just to start us off, so hopefully you can all see my screen, and sorry, I'm just flicking back there quickly. And what we're here today to do is to unlock the funding opportunities that can help turn your property development vision into reality. And I chose this picture because we've all got a different vision of what that property development looks like, whether we're working in student housing, whether we're looking to build something in a commercial space, a retail space, or we're wanting to sectional title our existing land that we might own or we own within a stokvel, or whether we have a group of friends that we are building with. We all start with that beginning, that vision of what we are trying to do. And we at Estate Living are here to help you achieve that vision throughout the lifespan of that development. So from this conversation that we're having today about how do we finance it, through the processes, and then across all the way through to when you are actually trying to sell your development and start the next one. So I've got a very short video on estate living and who we are and what we do. So I'm just going to play that now so that you can see a little bit more about who we are. So, as I mentioned, estate living works with specifically the residential and mixed use development. Our mandate, our vision for our business is to provide the best possible information to all sides of the value chain, from you as a developer looking like today's webinar for finance, through your development process, as you hand over to an HOA management or a sectional title management, help you with best practice policy and procedure and good governance, introduce you to innovation within that space, and then of course giving you access to residents and investors. People are looking to purchase within your development, and of course we communicate with residents as well to help with investor confidence, to talk about your developments, and to essentially help you sell that development one day. And then of course we have the affiliates, the experts like business partners who work in this industry, who have as much experience as we do, who understand the nature of property development. And so by bringing in those experts into our arena, we can assist you with other sides of the business, whether it's finance, technology, governance rules, writing up your MOI, or even just education around these different processes if you are new to the industry. So today, I love this. She builds, we fund. I like it. I wish it was we fund, we build. And we're talking today about understanding the blueprint. And really, there is a blueprint. I mean, development has been around for a while. Us ladies have probably been a little bit out of the forefront of it for whatever reason. I have a few conspiracy theories there, but that is definitely changing, and it's changing because the demographic of the industry is changing, and the demographic of what people are prepared to buy, where they want to live, the type of buyers, as in we're seeing a lot more increase in female purchasers into the industry, not just as developers, but as homeowners, what a female buyer with 2 or 3 kids might need in comparison to what was needed 10 or 15 years ago. That has changed. The lifestyle offering has changed. Access to transport and where that they work has changed. So, and also the management of the developments are changing. We're seeing more women walk into a management arena as well. So the entire industry is shifting, and it's so important that we be part of that shift and ahead of that curve so that we can secure the right type of tenants and owners for the future. So who are we and what do we know? Hestie is a lot. I love the surname. Labuschagne. I haven't said it in so long. I must be honest. There's not Labuschagne. I'm so glad I got it right. Hestie Labuschagne is part of Business Partners. She has been part of the industry for over 10 years. She's a financial guru, if I can say that. Oh dear.
Yes.
And she has an investment in the SME sector, and she obviously understands financial modeling, investment reporting, viability studies, risk management, so all of the different aspects that go into our development. And then, of course, myself, Louise Martin, I'm the CEO of Estate Living, and we
1709.
oh dear.
Yes, you will
If,
say.
if someone would mind muting themselves, I'd be very appreciative. And of course, we've been around for 16 years and we connect developers, financiers, investors, industry leaders, professionals. We help you with marketing, we help you with strategic partnerships, and we really assist with helping getting that development off the ground. So enough about me. I'm going to stop screen now, and I'm going to introduce you to Hesley. Hesley, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for putting this time aside. We really appreciate the opportunity to pick your brain. And if I can hand over to you, and let me find my mute button so I don't interrupt you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Louise, for the opportunity. We really appreciate any platform where we can meet and connect with entrepreneurs and really try to share our insights and our knowledge on the industry that we are serving. I definitely didn't make your job a lot easier. I mean, the combination of my name and the surname is quite a tongue tie. But you did perfectly well in that regard. Thank you so much for your kind introduction as well. So if you ladies would just give me an opportunity quickly to also share my screen so we can get the presentation started. It seems like we have, I was just about to say, it seems like everyone's in attendance, but I see there are still people joining. But as Louise mentioned, fortunately, this presentation and this webinar is being recorded, so you can always refer back to what we discuss here today. So I would just like to say again, thank you so much for everyone for joining. I know it takes a lot of effort and time for everyone to take your focus away from your business, right? And actually spend some time on yourself and educating yourself as well. It's really encouraging for me to see that there are so many females here, very active in the property development industry, or that are looking to enter as well. Property development actually remains one of the most powerful wealth creation opportunities in South Africa. It not only creates businesses, it also creates assets, community, and also generational wealth. For many developers, access to finance remains one of the most intimidating parts of the journey. So today's session is really to demystify that process for you. So it isn't just a presentation about funding products. It's really to make you kind of put the lens on from a financier's perspective to see what makes a project fundable, how do financiers think, and how do you position yourself and your business for the best successful outcome. So whether this is your first development opportunity, whether it's your 15th, my goal is to actually leave you with some practical insights that you can immediately apply to your business. So before we start, let me just see if I can go outside. There we go. So just a quick riddle, if you can indulge me. A father and his son are involved in a serious car accident. Both are taken to the hospital with critical injuries. The boy is rushed into surgery, but after examining the patient, the surgeon says, "I can't operate on this patient. He is my son." How is that possible? I'll let you think about that for a couple of seconds. You're more than welcome to also use the chat box to share some of your answers. So I'll take you out of your. Sorry,
the mother is the doctor.
Man, someone's stealing my my line there. But yes, that is in fact the answer. The mother is the surgeon. And it's really interesting, even when I was posed with this riddle myself, I didn't immediately arrive to the same conclusion. And I am quite a feminist, if I can call myself that. So it was very interesting for me, even with that lens that I've got on, that I also didn't immediately arrive to that conclusion. And I think it's because there is this unconscious assumptions about certain professions. So historically, we thought of surgeons and engineers and contractors and financiers and developers mainly as men, a very male-dominated industry. But as Louise has rightfully mentioned in the beginning, many women are entering this space, and we have the responsibility to challenge these perceptions, to overcome the barriers, and sometimes we have to work a lot harder to earn the credibility, or to establish the credibility rather. But the good news is we are changing the way that this industry is being viewed. And across South Africa, we are seeing a lot more women acquiring land, leading developments, raising capital, and building very successful property businesses. But the one challenge that comes up repeatedly is this big word, the big F word, funding, right? So I think understanding how capital works, how funders assess opportunities, that can actually become one of your greatest competitive advantages in this industry. So I really hope that after today, you've got some practical knowledge and you have more confidence actually to break these barriers and to start your funding journey. So just a quick overview of today's session and kind of some of the key touch points that we will be addressing. We will definitely discuss the feedback that many of you have submitted before the event. We will also discuss like funding applications and the struggle with it, what makes projects actually fundable, how funders assess risk, ways to raise equity, how to prepare a very strong funding application, and some options that are available in the market. And I really want to leave you with this opening statement and make sure that this is something that you remind yourself throughout the webinar is a lot of the times the challenge isn't necessarily the funding, it's the project readiness. And many opportunities, I believe, are financeable. The question is whether you are positioning it in the correct way. So, oh, bless you. So when we look at some of the insights from the survey and some of the biggest challenges that were shared with us through your feedback, it's very interesting that the responses were remarkably consistent. And I mean, today we've got women that are involved in various aspects, various phases of this big property development industry. And the first challenge that was mentioned repeatedly was access to funding sources and to investors. So many developers feel that they don't really know where to start, where to find the right funding partners, or even how to approach them. The second challenge was identified as equity. So this, I feel many respondents believe that they don't meet the criteria in terms of equity contributions and security requirements. Thirdly, the concern was raised about qualifying criteria and affordability. So many respondents have indicated that they have opportunities available, but they just don't believe that they meet the very traditional lending requirements. And a large number of you attending today also identified yourselves as new developers. So you feel excluded simply because you feel you don't have a track record yet. Project preparation was another recurring theme. Some of the things were mentioned like business plans, feasibility studies, financial models, pitch decks, packaging your project and understanding what documentation is required throughout. And then there was definitely a lot of concern about the funding process and the frustrations. Typical comments was the complexity thereof. It's very time consuming. Some found it very vague. And like I said, simply put, a lot of entrepreneurs identify that they simply don't know where to start. So there are questions raised like, what funding opportunities exist? What funder is right for me? What documents do I need? That kind of thing. So if these questions sound very familiar to you, please know that you are not alone, and this was shared by your peers. So the good news is that most of these challenges can be addressed through proper preparation, knowledge, and understanding the opportunity. So that's exactly what we're setting out to do today. But like I said, the big elusive F word was the main topic, the funding of these applications. And I think one of in my view, one of the biggest misconceptions is that there is no funding available. From a financier's perspective, in reality, many projects don't fail because funding doesn't exist. They fail actually because the projects aren't funding ready. So a lot of times what we see is weak feasibility studies, incomplete applications, insufficient equity, no clear exit strategy really for a financier. So I always want to encourage developers to ask themselves these 3 questions before applying for funding. So firstly, is there a proven demand for what I'm building? Secondly, can I demonstrate profitability? And thirdly, if I were to place myself in the shoes of the funder, would I lend money to this project? So I promise you, us as financiers, we aren't looking for reasons to decline applications. We are actually looking for evidence that this project can succeed and that the capital can be repaid. So the more uncertainty that exists in the application process, the more difficult it will be to obtain funding. So instead of asking, where do I find my funding? I think a better question to ask is, how do I make my project fundable? I think that shift in thinking changes everything. So, like I said, what makes a development fundable? So every funder is fundamentally trying to answer 4 questions. Can it be built? Can it be sold or rented? Will it make money? And how will we get repaid? Everything that they assess in this process is intended to answer those 4 questions. So let's break it down. Firstly, they assess the developer. So do you have experience? Do you have the capability to actually execute this project? And I want to just encourage emerging developers, don't panic when you hear the experience word. A lack of track record doesn't automatically mean that your opportunity won't be funded. Funders also assess the strength of your professional team. So a strong team of architects, engineers, quantity surveyors, project managers, and the legal professional team that support your projects can also add enormous credibility to your project. Funders don't just finance or back the project, they also back the team. Secondly, they assess the project itself. Is the location appropriate? Is there market demand? Does this product make sense? They also assess the numbers, of course, as financiers. So is the feasibility supported? Are the assumptions realistic? And are the profit margins sufficient? Fourthly, part of the numbers that they assess is obviously the capital stack that they have a look at. Who's providing equity? How much debt is required? Is the structure sustainable? And like I mentioned, at the end of the day, there must be a clear exit strategy. How will the units be resold? How many need to be sold for the debt to be repaid? So when all these elements align, the project becomes significantly more fundable. So like we said, how do I raise equity? This is a part of the assessment. It's part of the questions that the funders always look at. And many developers, I think, again, have this misperception that the word equity and they immediately think, oh, I need to have millions in my bank account. And that's not always the case. At its core, equity actually demonstrates the commitment and the risk sharing. So funders generally feel very uncomfortable if they're the only party taking risk in a transaction. So equity can take many forms. Like I've listed here on this slide, it could be sweat equity, it could be the landowner contributing the land into the development structure. It could be the experienced professional. It could be private investors that contribute capital in exchange maybe for shares or profit. You could even have situations where it's joint ventures, where the partners may contribute resources or experience or their networks. So successful developers have become very skilled in structuring their opportunity and combining these resources for equity. So many developers don't start with an abundant amount of capital. They actually build equity over time using these various equity forms, and they continuously reinvest from completed projects into future developments as well. So how do you go about preparing a very strong funding application? If there's one slide you need to remember today, I think this is definitely the one. And it starts with the funding application telling the complete story. So who you are, what is the opportunity? Why does this opportunity make sense? What is the evidence that supports it? And what funding, how much funding is required? I think a lot of the times you'd be surprised how elementary these questions are, but they seem lacking from some of the proposals that we receive. We also want to see how the project generates its returns and essentially how will the lender also be repaid. Funders, we don't like surprises. So the more complete and organized your application is, the easier it becomes for us to assess. So your application needs to demonstrate market demand, feasibility, financial modeling, approvals that need to be obtained, the funding required, equity contribution, and again, like I've mentioned, your exit strategy. And I think also just to note here, I think one of the mistakes that developers make is actually waiting too long before they start reaching out or speaking to their funders. They spend many months preparing the information only to discover later that they're targeting the wrong funding partner and they're not speaking to that particular funder's funding mandate. So sometimes a 30-minute upfront conversation can actually save you 6 months worth of work and that opportunity cost lost for taking too long to prepare your funding application. So I also tell any entrepreneur, not just developers, funding should actually be viewed as a function of your business. Think about HR, about finance, about operations. Those are functions in your business that require ongoing attention. And for me, funding is no different. Too many developers, too many entrepreneurs actually in general, I think, treat fundraising as a once-off event. They find a project, then suddenly they are scrambling to start looking for money. And I think what some of the successful entrepreneurs have actually managed is to think of funding differently and to approach it differently. They are constantly building relationships with funders. They are actively learning about the market, what institutions fund what type of products, and they are trying to identify the ideal funding partner for their specific project before the money is actually required, so that you make sure that your project is well positioned within the larger funding mandate. So just a little bit about business partners, maybe also, just to give you a background from where all this insight and knowledge and sharing is actually coming from. As Louise mentioned, I've been with business partners for more than 10 years, actually going on 14 years. But business partners has actually been around for 45 years. So we are a purpose-driven financier specifically positioned to unlock entrepreneurial potential and placing financing in the hands of entrepreneurs. So like I said, we were established more than 45 years ago by the Rupert family, and our funding typically ranges from 250,000 up to 50 million. And we really, what we try to do and how we try to position ourselves as a funder differently is we really believe that by financing and assisting entrepreneurs, we are actually assisting to build sustainable businesses, and that they actually contribute to the economic growth and transformative economic growth that our country really needs. So on an annual basis, we assist about 280 businesses with about R1 billion of funding, and we facilitate on average about 12,000 jobs per annum. So when we specifically look at business partners and the property development funding solutions that we have, like I've mentioned, we have capacity for funding up to 50 million per phase. We have a keen appetite to finance in the residential, commercial, and industrial developments intended for resale. And I think one of the things I want to leave with you specifically about the development cycle specifically is many people assume that financing only becomes available when construction actually starts. In reality, funding can actually play a part much sooner in the process. So different funders participate at different points throughout the development journey, and not every financier funds every stage. So for business partners, we've got a keen appetite to consider funding even the pre-development activities and costs that exist, depending obviously on the structure and the risk profile of that project. And these early stages are actually often where developers face the biggest cash flow challenges. So what I've said now, I want to demonstrate that with a couple of examples. So the first example I want to use here is an example of a property. Hi, sorry, I see someone is unmuted. Just please mute yourself. I'll definitely allow for some time for questions towards the end of the presentation. And you're also more than welcome to use the chat box to pop your questions in if you think you might forget it by the end. So as I said, busy with an example of a development that was in the West Coast specifically. And the entrepreneurs approached us here to develop 49 residential units. And it was based on a plot and plan situation. So when the entrepreneurs approached us, it was a vacant piece of land. They needed to acquire the land. They needed funding for the civils and professional fees so that they would be able to sell it then on a plot and plan basis. So when you look at this application, some of the, I don't want to say red flags, but essentially red flags could be, oh, but it's vacant land. Oh, there's no civil cost involved yet. In this case specifically, the entrepreneurs didn't have a large sum of equity or own funds that they could contribute to the transaction, hence the reason why they wanted to approach a funder. But what we saw the opportunity in this is for a couple of reasons. We looked at the entrepreneurs, had a good track record of similar type of developments that they have done in the past as part of the larger project team, but also a couple that they've endeavored on their own. We took a lot of comfort in the demand in that location specifically. Some of the feasibility studies that we were able to conduct really gave us a sense that this is a growing market and there's definitely a need for the specific type of units that were being built for them. In this development. So in this case, we structured a finance project over a 15-month period because we knew that the entrepreneurs were focusing just on this development. They weren't able to receive funding from other ventures that would be able to cover the interest cost for the period. So we included the interest in the capital ask as well. And we structured this funding in two parts. So there was a loan that was repaid over the 50-month period at prime +1. And then also for us to obtain our return in this transaction, we took a small profit sharing on the sale of each of these units once it was completed and being able to transfer to the next funder. So another example I'd like to use here is a property development, also in the residential space that we did on the Western Seaboard. So there was an opportunity to develop 19 townhouses for sale. In this case, actually, the entrepreneurs had secured the land with their own funding, but they actually needed funding for the construction and all the associated costs. So again, here, if we look at this holistically, some of the red flags, we can call it, was the fact that again, even though they had secured the land, it was still vacant. There were still civils that had to be brought in. And in this case, actually, the 19 townhouses was actually just phase one. But for efficiencies, the entrepreneurs actually wanted to include the civils for phase one and for phase two, which obviously substantially increased the cost of the construction. For it being townhouses, it being a sectional development title, the funder essentially had to stay in and only received or being repaid at the end. So getting the civils in, building the top structures, making sure we get certificates of completion and of compliance before those townhouses can transfer. So it's a much longer process. And like I said, the developer needs to stay in that process for a much longer period, extended period as well, which could potentially be seen as a deemed risk factor. And here specifically, entrepreneurs had no pre-sale. So vacant piece of land, that's it. No pre-sales, still had to establish the market demand, if I want to call it that. But again, things that gave us comfort is when we looked at the location and the market demand, it definitely outweighed the current supply. Again, we had a project team that was very experienced, good references could be obtained for them. So the whole team worked collectively well. So that is some of the factors that gave us comfort in this transaction specifically. Again, here we structured it over an 18-month period, again with the allowance for interest payments to be serviced by the loan amount. And again, here, like in the previous example, a structure where it was two parts, where a loan had to be repaid, as well as a small profit share for business partners on the sale of each unit. Some of the other funding opportunities that we have or that we investing in is student housing. So student accommodation actually remains a very interesting sector within the South African property industry. And the reason is quite simple. Demand outweighs the current supply. So every year, new students are entering the higher education system and they require accommodation. At the same time, most of these tertiary institutions continue to face housing shortages. Just apologies, a sip of water is needed for me. So what makes the sector very attractive is the fact that there's so many opportunities that exist in this space. So it could be from new developments, acquisitions, refurbishments, expansions of current portfolios, even conversions of properties that were utilized for other purposes prior. So for emerging developers, I would say student accommodation can sometimes provide a very scalable entry into the property market, but the same principles applies. The funders still want to understand demand, viability, management capabilities become very important here, and of course, your ability to service and repay the debt. So the fundamentals never change, irrespective of the industry. So if we look here at an example of a transaction that Business Partners Finance, it was here in Cape Town. And it was a business that started late in 2024. They currently had one house that was occupied by 10 students. And they now had the opportunity to purchase another property in very close proximity to accommodate another 32 students. So from the entrepreneur's perspective, it was, I've got this existing property, I've got a property very close. So from a management perspective, it's really easy for me if the properties are situated closely together. at the existing house, because she could only accommodate 10 students. There was a lot of requests from the institutions in that area for her to actually increase her capacity. So she knew that demand existed. So in her mind, it really made sense for this property to actually acquire this property. So again, if you maybe look at this transaction, potential risk points, red flags could be, you know what, when the client actually approached us for funding, so the business started late 2024, but she just like towards the middle of 2025. So a very long track record for an entrepreneur, less than a year. Prior to that, she wasn't really in this industry, so she was a new entrant to the industry. Obviously, if you look at going from 10 students to now 42 students, that's quite a significant jump in terms of your capability, how to manage those properties. The property that the entrepreneur was actually purchasing also wasn't in the current set that it was being bought, wasn't suited to accommodate students at all. It was a residential property, so there was a lot of conversion and additional costs that had to be incurred, which could actually be seen maybe as overcapitalizing in a property from day one. But nonetheless, there was a lot of mitigating factors for us. I mean, the entrepreneur is super impressive. From her prior business experience, had acquired the right skills to actually manage this business, was an entrepreneur, was always keen, searching for opportunities to upskill, to improve knowledge and understanding. Was a real, I don't necessarily always like to use this word, but I think for this entrepreneur, it really encapsulates a real hustler, really so motivated and had so many things in place to make sure that they succeed with this property. So business partners assisted the client here with purchasing the property, assisted with working capital for those conversions and making sure that it fits the requirements for NSFAS and also all the fees and associated costs with this transaction. So very interesting with the repayment for this transaction. It was structured over 120 months. We allowed for some interest to be paid as part of the loan, where after the client only had to pay interest for 3 months before the interest and capital repayment started. And here specifically, you'll see the we need to add up the 3 months interest only, capitalized interest, and the 96 months. It doesn't really tie up to 120 months. But what we try to do here specifically is to align the repayment of the client with her cash flow cycle. So understanding that with student accommodation, typically your accommodation is fully occupied between the months of February to end of November, December and January being your months where your students vacate and you're waiting for the new academic year to start and for the new students to come in. So making sure that we know in those periods where there will be cash flow difficulty, to not put further strain on the entrepreneur or on the business, to also structure payments within those couple of months. So again, here our approach was to have a 2-part repayment term with the client, one being a loan where it's an interest-bearing loan, repayable prime plus 1.1% over the 120-month period. But then for us to achieve our return on this transaction, the client also needs to pay a percentage of the property market value on an annual basis. And then very exciting for us specifically, and I think very relevant for today's audience. When we refer back to the survey and the feedback that we received, there was a lot of concerns from female entrepreneurs about access to traditional financing. And that's why this fund specifically, the Basari Women's Growth Fund, is so exciting for us as business partners. Because when we took a step back and we actually looked at the funding landscape, we look at the statistics and we compared the responses from female entrepreneurs to male entrepreneurs as to what the reasons is for their business not succeeding, for failing, essentially. And a higher percentage of female entrepreneurs mentioned that the number one reason why their business failed was this access to funding in comparison to the male entrepreneurs. And I think when we think of it holistically, and I think we need to look at it in a South African society perspective, and I think it also applies to international markets. Traditionally, females have been placed in the society, in our communities, as the caregivers and as the homemakers, right? As mothers and wives and daughters and sisters and friends, you know, and we are those things. Don't get me wrong, we are those things and we should be proud of it. But with that placement in society, actually also there came a misperception that because we are these things, we can't be successful entrepreneurs. We can't manage finance. We can't access finance in the same way that our male counterparts are able to. So this Basari Women's Growth Fund is actually breaking those barriers and those molds, and trying to make female entrepreneurs part of that conversation, part of that funding world, if you want to call that, by specifically creating this fund focused on female entrepreneurs, making sure that how the fund is structured and repayment terms, etc., is geared in such a way that it actually enables the female entrepreneurs to be successful and to continue growing their business, and that they feel that they are not excluded and they can break this mold of not being able to access finance. So specifically for this fund, we can look at transactions between 250,000 up to 5 million. We want the business to be mainly owned and operated by a female entrepreneur, so at least 51% of the shareholding being owned and operated, owned by the female entrepreneur. And this fund can be accessed for entrepreneurs from working capital requirements, equipment finance, takeover and property acquisitions, startup finance, and even replacement finance as well. So I want to share with you an example of this fund specifically. So again, in the Cape Town context, we had an existing NSFAS student accommodation provider. I think about 20 students, if I remember correctly, and now opportunity to existed for this entrepreneur to actually upgrade the existing facility from a grade D to a grade B, making sure that she is able to achieve a higher market turnover, a bigger share of the market that is out there. So all of the funding was going to go for funding of the working capital, to make sure that those upgrades could be made, and also the fees associated. So here we had an entrepreneur. I also believe this entrepreneur didn't have an extensive track record, but was at least operating for 2 years. Maybe some of the things that were barriers for her in previous applications for more traditional funding that is available, when they looked at her personal balance sheet, it might not have matched the capital need that she required. There was a situation where there was also judgment for this entrepreneur, where when you delve into the details as to how it occurred, and the measures that the entrepreneur took to rectify it, we took a lot of comfort in that. Again, with it being student accommodation and servicing NSFAS students specifically, sometimes the cash flow cycle was a little bit erratic as well, which also maybe could be a potential risk point for a fund funder. But again, so many other factors mitigating and overshadowing those potential red flags and contentious points in this funding application, which gave us a lot of comfort to continue with this funding application. So this funding opportunity was structured over a 60-month period. And as you can see here, the stepped installments really assisted the entrepreneur to make sure that she's got sufficient opportunity to actually do the upgrades, go through the grading process again, because that's also something we need to take into consideration for timelines, and allowing her then sufficient time to get all these checks and balances in place before the new academic year starts, and she's able to take in students with a grade B on her CV, if I want to call it that. So in this transaction, it was purely a loan at an interest rate of prime plus 5.5. Also, maybe I am interrupting myself in my full process, but maybe just also specifically with this fund and specifically with this application, another kind of risk point or contentious point was also the potential, let's call it, lack of security for this transaction. But again, that is one of the more traditional barriers, I think, to entry for female entrepreneurs in not being able to access finance. So with this fund specifically, we were able to overcome that hurdle as well for this entrepreneur. So I've been talking a lot today, but thank you for indulging me. But I'd just like to kind of wrap up maybe and just leave you with 4 key messages just to take away from this presentation before we start going into the Q&A section. And firstly, funding is available for more stages of the development than you may have realized. Like I've mentioned, from business partners' perspective, we definitely have appetite to even look at the pre-development costs associated with developments and development opportunities. Secondly, project readiness, project preparation is sometimes more important than actually the size of the project that you intend to take on. And then thirdly, as an emerging entrepreneur or developer, I actually want to encourage you to say that, yes, experience helps, but make sure that you are building a very strong professional team around you. So funders don't, like I said, funders don't only back projects, they back the team. And then lastly, please start with that funding conversation a lot sooner than you actually think you need it. Again, it's like I said, it's a business function. It's not a once-off event. So it is important to really engage early in those conversations, to understand the requirements, and to make your application stronger when it does land on the financier's desk. So don't allow the lack of experience or confidence or the industry stereotypes actually to limit your ambitions or your ambitions. Actually, every developer, every entrepreneur had to start somewhere and take that first step in their journey. So really want to thank you for participating today. Here are my contact details, and I really encourage you to please feel free to reach out. I'm more than happy to have a conversation, maybe discuss some funding readiness tips, maybe point you in the right direction, and then maybe that conversation can save you some time and some effort in your funding journey. I just want to mention also, after this presentation, there will be a link shared to each participant here. So if you are ready to start with that journey for funding and you'd like to apply for business partners, please make use of the link that's being generated for you to start applying. And if there are any questions throughout, you're also more than welcome to reach out to myself or to the team as well. So thank you so much for your time and your attendance. I am going to stop sharing my screen now and just see if there were any questions in the chat box and see how I could best address it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jessie. That was incredibly interesting. And And there's definitely some questions in the chat box. Everybody wants copies of your slides, and I know you're going to be sharing those. But I think let's just quickly start off with a few key pressing, just so that we have a quick understanding of the types of developments. So, the question is that has come up is, do you look at rural developments, township development, low-cost housing, affordable housing, and you've mentioned student. So those other categories, and then also businesses that are in the wellness space, or in the businesses that are slightly outside of what you would consider a property development fund, but are rather a company that is wanting to build. We had a wellness or a traditional healer where they needed land and space to build and run their business. Yes. So does the Besedi fund cover more than just property?
Yeah, so I think thanks, Louise, for that question, and also for the guest. So today was a very property heavy discussion, and the examples and everything I used was in the property sector. But actually, if you take a step back, we are industry agnostic, so we can finance across various type of industries. We have. So the only industries that we don't finance in is the primary agriculture industry. However, we do have appetite for secondary or agro-processing industry. And we also do not finance in the undermining or mining underground, just because our upper limit of financing is 50 million. So 50 million in underground mining is really considered a drop in the bucket. So yes, we definitely have appetite for different type of industries that you've mentioned now. Like I said, today the focus was more on the property side of things and using property examples, but that doesn't mean we don't have appetite for other industries as well.
Okay. My second quick question came up a few times as well. Is gap funding. So the question there is whether you have got funding for certain aspects of your development, but now need further funding. So for example, perhaps you have a 60% sell before you can get access to your funding through a traditional funder, and you need another 10% sales. You haven't achieved those sales. Do you fund those 10? Could you fund that 10% shortfall, 20% shortfall, so that all the funds can be released and the development can be started?
Yes. So I also just want to quickly step back before I answer that question, Louise. So I've mentioned now today specifically the Basari Women's Growth Fund and typically how we look at that specifically. But I do want to encourage any entrepreneur that is here today, if you maybe look at that fund specifically and you feel like, shucks, he said, I actually don't meet the criteria, or, I actually maybe have a funding need that's more than the 5 million specifically for that fund. I've also tried to illustrate that that's just one fund. We've got various other funding opportunities available. So leave that assessment up to us to make sure that we see what fund is best suited to you, even though you might preclude or exclude yourself from the start. Let us do the assessment on that and see where your funding fits in best. And then secondly, Louise, your question about the gap funding. So I want to make it clear, we are very happy to be co-funders in any type of transaction. We are able to assist entrepreneurs in those gap scenarios where they just need to complete a certain level before they are able to obtain the further funding rounds. So those are definitely applications that we have looked at in the past, and we do have appetite to finance.
Okay. I'm sorry, I'm whizzing through questions here just based on time. We had another question around, again, around, just to reiterate, low-cost housing and things like that. So we have a delegate here who has a land opportunity that's next to a township that could then build low-cost housing, not necessarily RDP housing, but low-cost housing for people. Would that be something they've got the plans drawn up by an architect, but they've now, so with a plan in hand, could they approach you for that 30-minute conversation to see how they would structure and whether that would be something that business partners, obviously slightly riskier development based on location, but a very high need for those particular units.
Yeah, you took my answer right out of my mouth, Louise. Yes, of course, in those cases, and I do believe in any case. I mean, even if you potentially like the West Coast example that I used as well. So it's not based in the CBD in the metro area. So one could potentially look at that and view, shucks, is it a good location? Is there demand for that? So yes, location will always be a question. Yes, the assessment will go about with regards to that, but so much more also the demand. So we know in South Africa we have various people entering the market, the property market. It's not just for a certain income class, it is actually becoming more accessible, and hence there is a need for more affordable housing in those areas that may be more closely situated to townships. So that doesn't automatically preclude you from not applying for funding or an automatic no from our side. So I would encourage those entrepreneurs to still engage.
A few questions around students. So some of our delegates have started student accommodation and wanting to expand, but the accommodation is now obviously launched at the beginning of 2026. It's been running for 2026, and now want to build a second, I'm going to just make an assumption there, build a second development or renovate a second space so that for the 2027 year or 2028 year that there is more accommodation available. Yes. Would that 7 months of experience count? They obviously built and filled and had occupants for 7 months. Would you consider that experience sufficient for them to approach you for funding to start a second development? There could be outstanding funds still due on the first development funding project, and they were looking at funding a second development project. Would that scenario be of interest? Well, not of interest, but would that scenario be sufficient evidence of a successful development?
Yeah, I think very interesting, Louise. Actually, the example that I used today for the client one of the examples for the client that we financed for that further opportunity in the student housing accommodation. Like I said, by the time she had approached us, it was also less than 12 months of trading before she wanted to undertake the next one, the next opportunity. But like I said, there was a lot of mitigating factors in that scenario. So even though entrepreneurs or developers here could feel, oh shucks, but I don't have the long enough track record. Yes, that is one element, but what are the other key mitigating factors in your application specifically that would make a funder say, you know what, yes, I see only 7 months of trading, but when you look at X, Y, and Z, it actually gives me a lot of comfort to look at your application. So don't always just get hung up, I want to say, on the reason why a funder would say no. See what your unique position is and what other factors you can highlight to the funder to say, yes, maybe I don't fulfill your typical requirement for track record in terms of 2 years, etc. I only have 7 months. But if you look at X, Y, and Z, I really think this still remains a good opportunity. And I would implore the funder to look at it.
I just have two quick last questions. I know folks probably need to get going. The one is, we've spoken about student accommodation, which is essentially a tenanted building.
Yes.
We haven't spoken about whether or not tenanted buildings are something that you're looking at, especially when you mention things like excess strategies. I have a question here where there is an existing block of flats with a proven cash flow. The Wood Business Partners look at it. I have a 20% of the purchase price for cap personal equity. Could she apply for funding for the remaining 80%? That would mean that it would not necessarily be a project which the developer would exit. They would then manage it as a tenanted building. And not necessarily as a sale and exit the property.
100%. So, yes, we have financed businesses in the past that have kind of dual hats on, where they are the property managers, but they're also building their property portfolio. So we have looked at applications like that in the past.
Okay. So, and the last one is on a slightly more personal note. I've just and I'm sure many of the people that are still with us in this chat room might feel my pain. So, so we found a property that a piece of land, getting land. It's in Umtata. Getting land is not always the easiest and simplest thing. Often the land is owned by multiple small rural farmers or agricultural land, which would have to be rezoned. And so it was a process of getting collaboration for that land to be sold. We had approached a government organization for security. I had a developer who was male, who was working on that process. They had experience in the industry. They had managed to get through a certain number of individuals from the CEFA funding, the government funding, but then got stuck. So I don't know if there was a bribe that was meant to be paid or something. Let me not say that aloud, but they got stuck with that process. And we looked at business partners as an alternative. And one of the challenges was surety. The developer themselves, the only surety we would have would essentially be the land, but because the land wasn't a traditional transaction, people will wait. We needed the funding to pay the land so that we could own the land, and we needed the funding to launch the project so that we could get the actual land, so you could see that something was happening, because building off plan to a demographic that didn't necessarily traditionally buy off plan in an area which didn't have many estate living type of developments. We wanted to build a sectional title development which had all of the lifestyle attributes that you would find in a traditional estate, but within a costing factor that is affordable to that particular market. We've done the feasibility, the demand was definitely there. But we got stuck with this government funding that was took 2 years, and we got pretty much nowhere. And then after that, we then came to looking at more traditional methods like yourselves, and that's where the surety became a problem. A surety seems to be, if you don't own a property already, you don't necessarily have a big bank balance, and the land that you're buying from multiple stakeholders who are happy to sell their land to you, but want their funds upfront. So you can't do a deal where you start building and then they get paid a percentage once those apartments or those houses or whatever are built. They want their funding upfront. How do you overcome that surety issue? Because I don't know about anyone else, and I'm not sure if everybody agrees, but a surety does does play a role here, and yeah, and that's my question. How do we overcome that?
Yeah. So I think I've spoke about a lot about it during the presentation. I spoke about mitigating factors. So I always try to use the example, a bit of a practical example. And I think you can use it either if you look at scales, or if you maybe imagine yourself a chair that has 3 legs on, right? So what you're always trying to do, or what we try to do as a financier, is always make sure that the scales are in balance. Or like I said, if you look at a chair with 3 legs, if one of the legs is a little bit wonky, a little bit broken, there's no security in the transaction, the type of land that it is, etc., there might be a couple of things that make one or two of the legs of the chair a little bit battered and bruised, and it's not a chair that you can comfortably sit on. You need to think about how you can bring that scale back in equilibrium, or what other measures you can put in place on one of these legs to make that chair a little bit more comfortable, a little bit more stable to sit in. So it's always supposed to be a holistic view of the transaction, to say, what, you know what, I understand that we don't necessarily have the security requirement, but here are some of the other mitigating factors in my development, or things that I can change in my development to make it more comfortable for the funder. So it's difficult for me to exactly say what in that specific case was the concerns. Maybe that was only one of the concerns. Maybe there were other ones as well. Like I said, it's all about how do we bring that application for funding more in balance. Because if it was already in balance, you wouldn't necessarily come to a business partners, you wouldn't necessarily come to a government institution. You would go to your more traditional commercial banks, which have an appetite for transactions that are already in equilibrium. And I mean, I'm not saying this to bash any financier. I truly believe there is a place for every financier. We play a great role in different stages of funding, etc. But when you come to an alternative financier like a business partners or a government institution, you need to think about the transaction holistically and how you're presenting it to make sure that that funder sees that the scales are in equilibrium.
Thank you. And just last question. We do have a client, a delegate. She had done her homework. She submitted her application to business partners. They were in partnership with an attorney and property speculator for 25 years experience, but wasn't successful. So I suppose it just goes, if I could it probably dovetails back to that question which you said, instead of why am I not getting funding, is how can I get funding? In the case of this particular individual, if they relooked their application form and, you know, sort of now that she's listened to some of the expectations of business partners and reapplied, is that a possibility to reapply once you have already been rejected, or you know, relook at your project, reapply, if they don't feel that they understood why they didn't receive the funding in the first place?
Yeah, like I said, I think it's difficult for me to maybe make a comment on a transaction for why it was declined or not if I haven't done the assessment myself. But I mean, with that being said, I mean, I've been here for almost 14 years, and I promise you, I still get excited for every funding application that I get. You could ask Kumina. We were at a conference the other day, and I said to her, Kumina, I got this email from this client, and they're looking for funding, and they've submitted their documents, etc. So there's always a excitement, there's always a buzz from our side when we get funding applications, and we really try to see if we are able to assist. But I mean, the reality of it is, unfortunately, we can't finance all the applications that land on our desk. There's no financier that will be able to say yes to all the transactions and funding applications that come on their desk. And I think it is always so important to give the entrepreneur the feedback exactly as to what were the issues when assessing this application, and always to open that door to say, you know what, should X, Y, and Z change, reapply, or maybe it's not now the time, maybe it's an opportunity that is better suited in a year's time, etc. Or, for example, with this Basari Women's Growth Fund, I mean, if this fund is quite new, if it was an application, some of these applications wouldn't have been perceived, or even, you know, wouldn't have gone through the traditional methods that we have for financing previously. So, you know, funders are always trying to, well, especially business partners, trying to make sure that we offer solutions that are better suited to what we see in the market and to adapt to that as well. So you're more than welcome to re-engage, see if there is appetite now, if some of the other funding options that we have available is now better suited to what you need as well. So really trying to understand what were the key issues with the initial assessment, and is there opportunity if they are bridged, if there is appetite to reassess.
Okay, thank you so much. I mean, there are so many other questions, things like, you know, key evidence, you know, you mentioned key evidence with the professional team. How do you gauge that key evidence? You know, how do you gauge the team, the professional team that you're putting around you as professional team? What are those kind of key evidence sort of touch points? And we have another question asking us about construction costs. You know, the architect gives you or the QC gives you a construction cost, but provincially construction costs are more expensive. I'm going to make the assumption that the team at Business Partners, having the experience that they do, are able to guide you slightly through that process. So you can use both your regional and also your developer, your architect's QC construction cost estimates. And then I'm sure your team would then do a bit of a deep dive into what you come back with and what you think that the construction cost would be. And I'm sure that's across the board with any of the costs that are required and the paper that's required. I mean, you are an expert in more than an expert in investment, well, planning when it comes to budget planning, and so I'm sure that you can lean on your relationship with Business Partners to answer those questions. So thank you very much to everybody that has attended today's webinar, and those of you who stayed a little beyond the time. We very much appreciate. Thank you so much Hesley for your experience and knowledge. It's been extremely helpful. I think we definitely need to get your slides out there. You and also your details. We will be sharing those details, Hesley, if it's okay with you. Everybody that's on the webinar, we have made a recording, so that will be shared as well. And I really hope that the next meeting we have, it's about the success stories of all the women that have joined us today, and whatever their project might be or business is, that they truly are able to tap into the success that Business Partners offers and what this new fund offers, which is unique to the industry, folks. This is innovative, and if we can overcome the barrier of getting the funding, then we can get on to overcoming our next barrier. And so thank you very much to everybody. I hope that you all have a wonderful Wednesday, and that Hesley, just say yes. That's all I can say.
I try to, Louise. I really try to. Like I said, there's always quite a lot of excitement on our end for any funding application, and we really try to see how we can be innovative and assist more entrepreneurs.
Okay. And for now, those of you who would like to do some research, you can go onto Business Partners website. The Precisely Fund is there. You can leave any comments on my email is in the thread, louise@estate-living.co.za, or you can give us a call, WhatsApp me. I'm happy to share details, but again, we will be sharing some more details as probably tomorrow or later today when the webinar recording is ready. So thank you again to everybody, and to our background. Let's not forget our team in the background from Business Partners who have been driving this webinar for us and making sure it all works well, and all the hard work that she put in to get this together. So thank you so much to Camilla. You can see her. She's muted in the background there, but thank you so much for your time and effort, and have a lovely day further.
Thank you, everyone. We appreciate your time. Have a great Women's Month.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.